Hello, and welcome to Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, an initiative by the Bangladesh Feminist Archives. I'm Tanvir Anoy, an academic author, archivist, and activist, and I'm honored to host today's conversation. This project is dedicated to preserving the voices of feminists who have shaped and continue to shape feminist and social justice movements in Bangladesh. Through these conversations, we aim to document their journeys, challenges, and contributions, ensuring that their work is archived for future generations. For this episode, we are honored to feature Sudeshna Biswas, a feminist archivist, organizer, and advocate for gender and religious minority rights in Bangladesh. Sudeshna was one of the organizers of Rage Against Rape movement in 2020, a grassroots mobilization against gender-based violence. She is deeply committed to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities and challenging uh, vegetarianism in Bangladesh. By profession, she is a microbiologist working at the root level to ensure equitable access to safe water and sanitization. She approaches activism with a philosophy of learning the rules of the system before dismantling it. Sudeshna is also a recipient of the ADB-Japan Funds scholarship, through which she pursued graduate studies in development management in the Philippines. Today, she will share her journey as an activist, organizer, and advocate, reflecting on feminist resistance, grassroots mobilization, and the intersection of gender and minority rights. Sudeshna, let's start with your journey. What first inspired you to become involved in feminist activism and advocacy?
I've been thinking about this question was there a specific trigger? So becoming a feminist didn't have a trigger. It came quite naturally to me. Um, Before even I knew it, people started calling me a feminist and that you are a feminist. They labeled me before I even understood why am I being called a feminist. But for my activism, it was a bit different. In 2022, it's when my activism journey started with the Rage Against Rape movement. When the whole world was in lockdown, including Bangladesh, um, we saw and we saw a sudden increase in crimes against gender minorities all over, right? And the same was the case in Bangladesh. And then the incident in Noakhali happens, where people under the ousted regime violated um, a woman, and that video went viral. And even then, the perpetrators were not brought to like justice. They didn't face anything until movements were created. That enraged us so much that a couple of us, basically a couple of us who were friends, we got onto a call and we're like, how can we really stay silent after all this when you can see the perpetrators' faces on the video, and even then they're enjoying the impunity. And then we reached out because by then, to be honest, we were not in the activism space, so we didn't know how to go about it. So we reached out to veteran activists. And we also did that because we understood that feminism by now had become, like in Bangladesh at least, become a very niche fight. And in order to be heard, we needed to put up more numbers. Sadly, in this populist world, numbers is important. And the other thing that we understood is that what we really wanted to do is that become a bridge between the new generation feminists and the veteran feminists or the veteran women's rights activists, and come together as one and bring about a change. So that is my journey.
Thank you so much, Sudeshna. Um, it's really tough to kind of point out like what is your journey and what made you feminist, right? Like I sometimes feel that like I'm born feminist, but I didn't have the, enough cachet to like to understand that like, oh, why I'm being feminist. How has your background in microbiology and development management shaped the way you view feminism and social justice?
Okay. Um, to be honest, I really don't think so that my my background, my education had a part to play um, in becoming a feminist activist. But what my work in the development sector enabled me to understand was that how things are so different outside of Dhaka, because I really worked in villages. Um, and that, I must accept that I do come from a privileged background with certain amount of privilege. And I can shut off my eyes and ears and stay happy throughout the life and not face most of the backlash um, that any regular gender minority or any kind of minority faces in their regular life in Bangladesh. But that's not the case for all. So that is something that the development sector has enabled me to see. But, and yeah, that's about it, to be honest. Like, other than that, my activism was a very personal journey, and very few external things had anything to do with it. External things as in like any other thing that would push me to become an activist. Yes, there were events, there were instances of violence that was not inflicted on me but on others, that pushed me to become an advocate, but nothing in my life, to be honest.
Thank you, Sudeshna. So let's talk Rage Against Rape, shall we? You were one of the organizers of the Rage Against Rape movement in 2020 in Bangladesh. Can you share what led to this movement and what is meant for feminist activists in Bangladesh? I know you shared a little bit, but let's expand on that.
So back in 2020, when we were in a new normal, which is called COVID, um, suddenly on Facebook there was a video that was circulating, um, that um, a woman a woman had faced violence from men from the previous who were protected by the previous regime, who were part of the previous regime. And these were not your regular big leaders, okay? These were your really small time leaders from the periphery of Bangladesh. And that video was, it's not that, it was not going against Facebook community standards or whatever. It was being circulated from one person to another. People were talking about it, but not also as much because it's easier to sometimes just ignore and move on, right? Because seeing so much violence, thinking about it really changes you, like changes you as a person. And that is what happened to us. A couple of us, my friends, Umama, me, and many other. There's Saad, there's Ahir, there's Tasafi, and then there is the veteran feminists who then decided on a call. We were all on a call crying that how can this happen in 2020? That there's a video and there's still like the survivor is still at the mercy of the perpetrators. That how can this happen? These are the things that we had just seen in movies, right? That in some Bollywood movie, that this is happening in some part of Bihar, that, and you always put it like you shove this to a back of your mind that, oh, this happens somewhere else, this doesn't happen so close to home. And that's when on the call we were like, okay, enough is enough. I think we need to be heard. The government needs to do something about it. We cannot just sit back. And that's how the Rage Against Rape movement happened. The Rage Against Rape movement also gave birth to a coalition, which was Feminists Across Generation. This coalition was formed with the vision that veteran feminists and young generation feminists would have one per platform where they come and where they share how to make the feminist fight in Bangladesh more intersectional, and that to understand the feminist fight in Bangladesh hasn't really evolved from the time that it started. And it was high time in 2020 that it evolves into something more. So this is how Rage Against Rape came into being. And then we had our first protest in front of the parliament, which but till then there was still the mandate of people not going out without masks or all that was happening during COVID. But we decided that it's time to defy that, because if that is what will get us heard, then be it so. So yeah.
It was a really tough time, right? COVID back 2020. It's been, I would say, 5 years, really, right? 5 or 4 years? Oh my, I
It's
really
going to
don't.
be 5 years this October.
Uh, I really don't want to. I really don't want to remember. But thank you so much for doing that. Okay, I think that was one of the interesting and also very effective way to show your age. And I never seen, although I've also like kind of growing up, that's true as well. But that particular, I would say, movement was very much needed with that whole intersectional, I would say, touch, right? Like that was not just like the, what we say, like a woman oriented, feminist oriented rage. It's just like all across that intersectional, I would say, gender, class, sexuality, everyone in this particular spectrum, they're like, express their rage to that. So I really, really do appreciate whatever you have done that time with your friends, with your colleagues, and with your, peers. So, what were some of the biggest challenges in organizing this movement, and how did activists navigate repression or backlash?
Okay. Um, maybe it has been so long that I forgot the challenges, but I think more than external challenges, it was more of an internal challenge as well in organizing something that big. Um, the the very first challenge was quite obvious. It's COVID. No one wants to put their parents at risk because all our parents are, elderly. So me coming out, being in a crowd without a mask would put my parents at danger when I go back home. So that was a thing that everyone was thinking about. And when we made a public call that come out on the streets with everyone you have at home, that was also something that everyone had to think about, that is this responsible or not? Is this the right call to put out? But we decided that if not now, then when? And that it was enough. Like, yes, yes, getting COVID was a big risk, but if we were living in such violent conditions where your perpetrator is not even held accountable, then what's the point of surviving? But more than like repression and backlash, it was also organizing us in all our identities, because I think at this point what we really wanted to ensure is that feminism in Bangladesh also evolves. Okay, that gone are the days of the first wave feminism, The world has evolved to fourth wave and even fifth wave feminism, where the fight is intersectional. It is about class. It's about gender minorities. It's about religious minorities, and it's no longer just about women. So that is something that needed to be communicated as well within within the feminist space in Bangladesh. I think the main challenge was more internal than external. Yes, we did have a few risk assessments done before we went on. That we got on a call with a few lawyer friends of ours, that what if this happens, what if that happens, and these lawyer friends were also our comrades. So then we came to the conclusion that the lawyers are not going to go to the movement. The lawyers are going to stay back home, and if it comes to that, that you know that there is the whole like legal system involved in this, that the lawyers then come to the rescue. So in Rage Against Rape, most of our lawyer allies actually stayed home, so that if push comes to shove, there's someone to save our asses.
That's really interesting, I would say. So the lawyers stayed like in a zone, and like you folks went far to like to the protest, right? My question is that like uh what kind of like things you folks were expecting, that like you folks were being kind of like will be arrested or something, like
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah, we
yeah.
were, we were. And even afterwards, every every movement that was every protest that was led by the coalition Feminists Across Generation, that is something that we were um very mindful about. Even there was actually a very close run-in with the police on the uh, very last Moshal Michil, um, which started from the ranks, Naripokho, and we were going towards Parliament. And Parliament was in session, and they wouldn't obviously let us go to the Parliament. Oh my God, we were surrounded by police. They were holding hands and they were barricading us. They would not let us go.
I remember
So,
that I was there as
oh,
well. Yes.
oh, right, you were
Yes.
there. Wasn't that the movement where I just went randomly up to you?
Yeah, so like, are you Tanviron? And that is the first time we saw each other, and I'm so happy that like you called me out that day. So we made this connection. No, I really appreciate that. But yeah, that was a one. I really remember that day, and I think. I had my camera with me, so I was kind of like randomly like hopping around there and there. We started from the ranks, right? And then I think in front of Bengal, I think we are being kind of like, remember?
So we were stopped first in front of Bangladesh Eye Hospital,
Eye
that they're
hospital?
not,
Yeah,
yeah, they're not going to let us get onto
yeah,
Shadesh number,
yeah,
because they're like, Parliament is in session,
yeah,
everyone's there, the Prime Minister is there, you cannot go.
yeah,
And we're like, we're gonna go. And
yeah.
we also, it didn't help our case that we also had the torches,
Oh
fire,
yes,
bra-
absolutely.
brandishing torches with us.
Yeah.
So
And the second time
then
you were being like in front of Pina's Bazaar or like Bengal. I kind of like
So it was much before, actually. It was around, do you remember the old barbecue tonight, or the or where the Zindian restaurant
oh
is?
yes, yes, I do
That
remember.
is, so that is the negotiation then. So basically, I'll tell you, it was Shirinapa from Naripokko and I
Mhm.
who were negotiating with the police,
With the
that
police.
that because we were the ones who had only somehow gone, like everyone was held back, and we somehow slipped past the police and we went ahead, and they were telling us that, no, please, we're requesting you, we don't want to we don't want this to become messy.
Mm.
And then we negotiated that we're going to do this, and and that you have to let, like, we have to get on road number 27 no matter what. So that's where the so we were supposed to go to the parliament, but obviously that's not going to be allowed. So
Yeah.
that's where we then came to the, what's the good word, middle ground, that we're going to go till a little further, and then
Yeah.
take and
Take a
the
U-turn.
procession will come back to China and end
Mm.
there.
And there, yeah.
Yeah,
I
we ended
remember
in front of China. Yeah,
China. That's something I remember. Yeah. And
crazy. Do you
yeah.
remember how many police were there?
Oh,
Like all
yes.
of a sudden,
I mean, there's so many, so-called bad people around the city, and we became the bad people,
we
and we
became
kind of like halt, hogging the traffic, or like we're kind of like saying that like like it's a busy day in a Dhanmondi and you folks are like doing woman stuff in the streets, right? So that was really really, I heard a lot of like the people from the streets, they were making a lot of derogatory comments here, there, and
oh,
there,
of
here.
course.
There's like, Kede kuno kaj kam nai, right? Like, nothing to like to do, blah, blah, blah. And that was a really, I would say, that is the first time I kind of like, I worked before, but it's more likely that time I was mostly actively kind of like working and walking. Like I'm not a professional photographer, but that particular time I had a camera, so I kind of like, in a like shocker bosh it's like a hobby or thing. So I try to do that. But I do have so much respect to the people who are like, covered them. And like you remember like there were like a couple of like also performances as well,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Whenever
We had a few performances as well.
yeah.
Mhm.
That Marshall Mitchell, I will never forget. So thank you so much for like, being the part of that. So what lessons did you learn from this experience about grassroots feminist organizing and mobilizing people for collect collective action?
So one thing that I definitely learned, and this was a good learning as well, um, because as I said, I accept that I come from certain amount of privilege. Uh, and that I may also live in a privileged bubble. But what I also understood is that even if you speak proper Bangla and like really good Bangla, um, even then you wouldn't be able to relate to an everyday experience of someone maybe living in Rajshahi, because our lives are very different in the capital, firstly, and their lives are very different. Um, Even the everyday struggles of, then I'll go back to my work, which is water, and I'm very passionate about it. Like, we wouldn't even understand the basic struggle of having access to water. Um, Very few of us face it in the capital on a daily basis, right? So no matter, Sudeshna, who does not speak as clean Bangla as I would like to, or I'm as far from understanding what someone from the periphery of Bangladesh goes through every day as compared to someone who speaks completely perfect Bangla. But there's a but, that the violence is the same. The violence that that person who's not a gender minority, who's maybe a class minority, who's maybe a religious minority, like marginalized and minorities often face the same amount of violence wherever they are. Their lived experiences, their feelings, and their traumas can be a point where they bond. And I think till I became an activist, and I'm, a few years into the activism, because in the beginning I would really feel that, um, the entirety of Bangladesh, I don't understand it. It doesn't understand me, because maybe on a regular day, I'm more of the English speaking person who stays in Dhaka in a safe neighborhood. But that's the same for most people. Like anyone who doesn't what live a day in other person's shoes, we really wouldn't be able to understand what the person who faces violence on a regular day goes through. And often when we talk about violence, we think it's physical. It's not always physical. It can be different types. Often violence is it's also like how it's inflicted on someone by someone else. It's also unspoken of. Like, if we talk about your religious minorities, the very fact that they have generational trauma that acts as a barrier is also a violence. And that is something that we fail to recognize.
Thank you, Sudeshna, for the important, I would say. What are the biggest challenges these communities face today?
The biggest challenges that these communities face today, sadly, is that the majority does not understand where they're coming from whenever they talk about um, their whenever they talk about what's wrong or whatever they're facing, or the setbacks that they have in their lives. And for the longest time, the majority of Bangladesh feel that religious minorities and gender minorities have been given a lot of advantages in the during the last regime, the ousted regime, which is not true. It's a narrative that has been created and fed as well, that religious minorities, gender minorities got a lot of leeways, but that's really not true. If you look on a regular day, religious minorities rarely speak of what's happening. There's only a few of us who speak on it. And the majority also never becomes our ally. And then there comes the whole geopolitics into the scenario. Like, we cannot also ignore geopolitics. And whenever a religious minority or a gender minority starts talking about whatever they go through on a regular basis, that's when the majority would then bring in geopolitics and go like, don't play into the Western propaganda or the Indian propaganda or the China propaganda. Yes, I will accept that there are all these propagandas there, but it's also true that a majority, that your regular Bangladeshi would not understand what a Hindu Bangladeshi or an Adivashi Bangladeshi faces or experiences on a regular day basis. Like things like not
Sure. S- mm. So, Sudeshna, you have been vocal about gender and religious minority rights in Bangladesh. What are the biggest challenges these communities face today?
So yes, you're right that I've been vocal about gender and religious minority rights in Bangladesh, because I also come from these communities. So I understand what these communities go through. I understand the generational trauma. I understand the lack of allyship. I also understand that there is a sense of betrayal as well within the activist space, because there is a lack of empathy. People don't want to hear what the majority of Bangladesh has done to religious minorities, to gender minorities. as well. They don't want to listen to the generational trauma that these groups of people have. There's definitely no empathy. There's definitely no apology. The only way to move forward from this is through an apology. Now, you ask, is it going to be a mass apology? No, it doesn't need to be a mass apology, but just being apologetic about what our ancestors have done to a certain other group is also needed. The challenge that these groups face is firstly the othering. And whenever they are about to speak up, they're always silenced with the excuse that don't play into the Western propaganda, don't play into the Indian propaganda, don't play into the China propaganda. Yes, there are all these propagandas at play. I will agree. Okay, there is geopolitics at play, but we cannot also disagree that these people have gone through all these violences on a daily basis for forever. Things have never changed for the groups, for these groups especially. And there's a narrative, there's a very popular narrative that during the time of the ousted regime, the religious minorities and the gender minorities were in a very advantageous position, that they held high offices, they held higher positions in government. But if you look at the percentages, it does not even equate in that way. Um, or even if you look at like the vested property law, like how is such a law still widely accepted in a country in this day and age? How do we answer to this? So the biggest challenge that these group faces is that the majority first do not want to hear that what the majority has done over the years. And even if they are able to raise a voice, there's huge amount of backlash, even from allies who would want to just stay silent on these issues. Yeah. And it's disappointing, and it's very saddening, and it's frustrating for me as well to see that.
Indeed, it's really extremely frustrating. Although I kind of belong to the majority side of that particular spectrum, although I do belong to other minority, I would say, spectrums, but then again, I cannot dismiss that. Like I'm also as a part of that majority system as well. So it's also frustrates me how we kind of dismisses the whole situation about like this whole hierarchical situation, right? So it's also very much important that that the people from the majority side, they also need to to make sure that the minority voices are being heard. So how do feminist movements in Bangladesh engage with issues of religious and ethnic minority rights, and what more needs to be done?
There needs to be more allyship. There is no other way of doing this. And to be honest, the feminist fight in Bangladesh has not really evolved into becoming an intersectional fight. It Veteran feminists mostly don't understand what feminism is, which way feminism, where the world is in feminism, which wave is going on, and how this fight has really become intersectional in terms of class, in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of ethnicity. In Bangladesh, it's still very segregated. And in Bangladesh, feminist activists still think that these are to be handled by some other movement. But no, this is also a part of the feminist movement, and that is the issue that we really need to address. That all this actually falls under the feminist umbrella, and this is a feminist fight, because feminist fight is about creating a world that is nonviolent. It's about creating a world that's equal for everyone, equal of opportunities. That is what we need to understand. We don't also understand that on most days. So that is where the Bangladesh feminist movement needs to go to from here, because it's yet to happen.
Thank you, Sudeshna. The next question for you to be, how do you approach activism in a context where speaking up against this whole majority I I cannot pronounce this word, but I always have this, issue with like pronouncing this word, but like this whole maturity spectrum can invite insignificant pushback.
Okay, for me, okay, I'm terrible at diplomacy, though I got better at it with my master's, with my 1 year in Philippines, but I really mostly don't care about the pushback. Here, sometimes what my friends like Umama does is that uh, she would amplify my voice more than so that I don't face that backlash, that she would speak on it because she is Umama. She comes from a certain identity that gives her some amount of impunity. Not impunity, impunity is the wrong word, that gives her some amount of safety net to fall back on. So this is where allyship comes into play as well. For me, okay, I rarely think of backlash whenever if there is something that I think that I need to talk about, I will talk about it. I very rarely think of backlash, but I think maybe I should also give it a thought. But then again, I don't want to give it a thought because I feel it will scare me more and scare me into submitting. And that is what has happened throughout generations. And I don't want to be taking it forward with me.
That's a great answer. Thank you. You have spoken about the idea of learning the rules of the system before dismantling it. Can you elaborate on this philosophy and how it shapes your activism?
So, often so basically activism is breaking rules, right? And we often get into activism without understanding what the rules of the society are. And that's where I think often activists suffer from an identity crisis of what are they fighting against, and then they're fighting against maybe too many things, and then they also don't understand what they should be fighting for. So that is what I meant by rules of the game, that understanding where the society stands, understanding what are the norms of the society, what are the rules of the society, and what we are trying to break is what I meant by dismantling the structure. Because I would even say that for myself. Like when I came into, I think to be honest, okay, when I came into activism, I had not read so much about feminist theories, feminist writings. I didn't read so like I used to read a lot, but not on this particular issue. So once I came into feminist activism, that's when I learned that okay, I need to start reading about it before I want to dismantle a structure. Maybe, because maybe a structure that is there doesn't need to be dismantled. Maybe the people in the structure also want to change it. So I also need to understand that. So that is what I meant.
Thank you. So how do you see feminist movements evolving in Bangladesh, particularly in response to rising authoritarianism and gendered violence?
So that's what Feminists Across Generation was, right? The coalition, that there needs to be an evolution in how feminism is practiced in Bangladesh, that this is an intersectional fight, that that there are some basic needs that a state needs to ensure to its people. And it's basically against feminist activism is basically speaking up against any authority that tries to hold you back, or even not just trying to hold you back. Feminist activism is actually a pressure group as well. In Bangladesh, sadly, it hasn't evolved. It's still stuck in women's rights movement. Yes, it is needed. Women's rights movement is needed because In Bangladesh hasn't even signed CEDAW, where women are supposed to get equal rights to property, like has equal rights in property, in like inheritance. So I understand Bangladesh has its own set of fights in women's rights, but we also need to understand that when you make it an intersectional fight, that's when it kind of becomes a populist movement. That's when it becomes a people's movement. That's when you don't have to separate movements, and you separate the numbers and you break down in numbers. Power is in numbers no matter what. Today's world is a populist world. We also need to realize that. So that is where the Bangladesh feminist movement needs to go into. It needs to unite people. It needs to understand where we can find our common ground and move forward with it.
Thank you. So what strategies do you think are most effective in building solidarity among feminist, minority, and social justice movements?
Understanding where we are, firstly, all these groups, that where are we standing, on what are we standing, and what do we really want to do. So these three questions really need to be answered for us to be able to come together. And also then understanding the basics, okay, that like the basic of what is feminism. I think even understanding that basic can really help build a lot of solidarity. And the other thing in building solidarity would be listening to these people who who live lives, who see things on a daily basis that maybe a regular person from the majority side wouldn't see, and understanding it without thinking of, okay, this plays into their propaganda, this plays into someone else's propaganda. Leave it out. There will always be some propaganda, but there is also reality, realities that I live through, realities that someone from Chittagong lives through, the hill tracks. So listening, empathizing, understanding what's the common ground.
Thank you, Sudeshna. So, looking ahead, what do you see as the most urgent priorities for feminist activism in Bangladesh?
Safety, safety for gender minorities, safety for religious minorities in Bangladesh uh, is of utmost importance. And that is something that should be prioritized through the feminist movement right now. Because if you don't even have to refer to the newspapers, you just have to go through social media and you'll see what is happening. Um, and and if you bring it down, yes, people will go like, oh, there's also breaking into houses, there is like, people are being people's things are being stolen at gunpoint or like something like that. Yes, those incidences are there. But look into the number of incidences that are happening against gender minorities and religious minorities, and just don't shove it under the rug. Acknowledge it, address it. And like it's high time that we start speaking about it, because Bangladesh 2.0 is supposed to be everyone's Bangladesh and not just, again, the majority's Bangladesh. And this is the time to set this record straight.
Safety is really, really important right now. It's just, every day I wake up with so many news about like, safety security. I'm not saying that like it didn't happen before, but it's just like we really need to like to be very much aware about what's happening around, and we just do not one that like, oh, it happened before, why it didn't concern you right at that time, and now you kind of like making a big situation about it, or big like making a big statement out of it. Like I really do dislike this kind of like pinpoint behaviors and stuff as well. Really need to like to call out bad behaviors, right? So absolutely, something happening around, that something is has to needs to be addressed, right? So, so what advice would you give to young feminists and activists who want to challenge systemic injustices?
Read, read and think. I think this is something that we collectively don't understand how important it is. It's so important to read and so important to also critically think because, taking to the streets is very important as well. But taking a step back and also doing a problem solution analysis and getting to the root of the problem is also important. We cannot just be screaming, we cannot just be going out to protests. We also need to understand what do we have to dismantle, what issue is this stemming from, how do we dismantle it. Because often whenever I do this problem tree analysis, at the very core of it, I see education as the problem, the lack of education as the problem. And that also helps you understand what your fight is going to be. Is it going to be an everyday, is it going to be performative activism that just going out on the streets? That's important as well, okay? If it's that, great. But if you want to make sustainable and long term changes, then you need to get to the root of the problem and understand what it is. Yeah.
Big advices, right? Finally, is there a particular story or experience that encapsulates your passion and commitment to feminist resistance and social justice?
You might roll your eyes at me for saying this, but so I read newspapers. Okay, I have become my father, where I read multiple newspapers. I'm subscribed to every newspaper on earth from different countries. And I think that is something that keeps me, whenever someone tells me, oh, this is not needed anymore, that is when I take out the newspaper and go like, this has happened today. What do you mean by feminism is not needed? What do you mean by that speaking about equality of rights, equality of opportunities is not needed? This is happening in some part of the world. Until this world becomes a safe space for everyone who's different, who's a minority, who's marginalized, we cannot stop talking about this. Yes, all of it seems like you have been talking about this for 20 years now. I have not been talking about this for 20 years, just an example. But if this is still happening after still talking about it for 20 years, then we have to talk about it for 50 more years. And that is what keeps me going. Every time I think that, oh, maybe, it's time to take a step back and relax, I open the paper in the morning and I'm like, how do I do it? I can't. So, yeah.
Well, it's becoming very, very tough right now, right? Yeah, it's just very tough. Sudeshna, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your insights, and your vision with us today. Your work in feminist activism, minority rights advocacy, and grassroots mobilization continues to inspire movements for justice and resistance in Bangladesh. As part of the Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, your voice will serve as a valuable resource for future generations seeking to learn from and build upon feminist activism. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Bangladesh Feminist Archives YouTube channel for future episodes. Stay tuned for more conversations with feminists, shaping Bangladesh history and future. Thank you again, Sudeshna, and thank you all for being part of this journey. Thank you, Sudeshna.
Thank you for doing this.